Hello and welcome to the Philippines. There is some travel news out there. Some of it's good, some of it gives us a little bit of an idea of what's going to happen going forward. I've got a few predictions. I've made some in the past, and I'm going to talk a little more about some of those predictions, what I think will happen in the months and years ahead. Some of the good news, for instance, the Philippines has come out with a list of, I think they call them green countries, countries with a low enough virus cases that they will allow people from those countries in, with the stipulation they must have a pre-existing visa before they come in here. And we'll talk about some of the visas and restrictions and what's available to travel here in a little bit. But at least they're talking about that. They're talking about allowing foreigners in. At the present time, you cannot just fly in, as many nations were able to do. People from many nations used to be able to fly to the Philippines, get a visa on arrival, just show up, show your passport, and they stamp it for 30 days, and then you can renew it after that. Anyway, we're going to get into some of the details here. The industry, the airline industry, the hospitality industry has been destroyed pretty much. So they need the business. They need people to start flying again, traveling. For instance, PAL, Philippines Airlines, have been talking for some time about possibly filing bankruptcy. So if they go ahead with that, if you have a voucher, will that voucher still be any good? If you have that voucher, you might want to book a flight while you can. For some time in the future, I don't know, big I don't know, what the status of vouchers would be at the point where they do file the bankruptcy. Other airlines as well, they've been putting out, a number of airlines have been running all kinds of specials, really, really super specials. The question is, and I almost bought into a couple of them, flying domestically in the Philippines primarily. And I finally decided not to, because I don't know if I spend $100, $200, $300 on unlimited flights, something like that, over the course of a year. I don't know what if that airline goes into bankruptcy, if those tickets and airline vouchers will be good at that point in time. I think I think there are over 40 airlines worldwide that have gone out of business permanently during this last 15 months because of the global travel lockdown. Hopefully we can go from this, with all the borders closed pretty much, to this as the countries start opening up. And we'll talk about Europe first. This is the European Union COVID passport goes live across 27 country block. And we'll get into some of the details. This may be a little bit of what we're looking at in the future across much of the world to open travel back up. Spain has opened back up recently as well. The airline industry itself, association, has come up with a similar type pass, and so there's different types of passes going around. We'll see which one works out in the end, but probably will be a combination of several ones. Hopefully they're compatible with one another. They have a site where you can go to get the EU COVID certificate issued and verified. Now the details are very important, and you can read the first two paragraphs if you wish. If you wish, let's go down to the bottom of the third paragraph. The most important details. Under the digital COVID certificate scheme, EU citizens can travel within the Union by showing proof. Now these are the keys, either digitally or as printout, that they have either been vaccinated against the virus, number one, number two, tested negative for it, number three, or recently recovered from a COVID illness due to the presence of antibodies. So that includes A lot of us. And if you don't fit into those categories, you should be able to get tested and show a negative test for it. Certificate holders should be exempt from having to undergo restrictions such as quarantine when traveling within EU. Now, I suspect that much of the world will take on a similar type system uh, in the coming months. We'll see how fast it progresses. Once a few nations start, there's going to be competition to show that, hey, we can open up too. We can do this. So hopefully we'll see that here in the Philippines. And I'll get into more details about the Philippines here in a little bit. But first, where do we go from here? I have read, for instance, as the economy picks up in the USA, and probably the case across part of Europe as well, the airlines have laid off, furloughed, and retired so many of their workers during this crisis that as the economy picks up a bit, they don't have enough people to handle all the jobs, and they've actually been canceling flights because they don't have the manpower. They don't have the pilots or the ticketing agents or the people who to take care of the luggage, all those sorts of things that they've laid off, furloughed over the last 15 months. So they're scrambling, trying to get to even asking office personnel to volunteer uh, to do some ticketing work or different parts of the where they need the personnel. So there is a bit of restructuring, a bit of adapting, and trying to fill the holes. Secondly, the how long are these virus passports going to last? Surely they aren't going to last forever. But I do predict that travel will be more controlled in the future. It will vary by country, by region. Here in the Philippines, I think that it actually happened before the economic lockdown, travel lockdown. A place like the very popular Boracay island and beaches, they had too many tourists there, and they shut it down for 6 months to rehabilitate that area. Thailand has done the same thing with a couple of beaches there in the last couple of years. There are a number of other islands that I'm familiar with, very popular with tourists that they have regularly have more tourists than they can handle. So in the past, we were able to get on a ferry, get on a plane, fly someplace, walk in, find a place to stay, or book something ahead of time without any restrictions. Now, I suspect that this will be an opportunity for the governments and the different areas and regions here in the Philippines, Thailand, different nations to start controlling. In fact, I've read that Croatia has a huge, unbelievable number of cruise ships that come to Croatia, many more than what they can handle. Turns in just to an overwhelming crowd. But they will use this opportunity to start controlling the numbers. You'll have to book the ferry, the resort ahead of time so that they can limit and control the number of people going into there. Now, will that mean an increase in prices? Because supply and demand, there's more supply, more people wanting to go to those areas than there is available spots. So I suspect maybe initially, as they try to get tourism back, you'll see some deals, but eventually it's going to get a little more expensive to travel to go to these destinations that have high demand. As far as airline prices, travel costs over time, that's anybody's guess. Um, I know some of the airline prices have gone very high because they're flying a plane that can hold 300, 400 passengers. Maybe they have 40 or 50 passengers, and they're hauling freight, if anything. And they know that if you really want to go, you're going to pay the price. So some of the prices have gone up. A friend of mine found a pretty good deal recently, going from the Philippines back to the U.S. But you really have to look for those deals. I've been watching the travel industry for many decades, and I've seen the airlines come and go. I've seen the bankruptcies and the conglomerates pair up, one buy another one out. Um, so the future is kind of a big question mark as regards to that. We'll just have to wait and see. Now let's get into some specific Philippine Bureau of Immigration guide on travel restrictions allowed to travel to the Philippines. Filipino citizens, Balikbayans, foreign nationals with valid and existing visas, and you need to check with your closest consulate in your country to make sure your visa is valid and or try to get the proper visa to travel. Now here is a bit of good news going forward, hopefully. The task force, IATF, they have a list of, and I'll go over the list of countries. Green countries jurisdictions are those classified by the Department of Health as low-risk countries jurisdictions based on disease incidence rate, according to the IATF. Under the rules, passengers vaccinated abroad must undergo a 7-day quarantine at a facility upon arrival in the Philippines instead of the standard 10-day facility-based quarantine and 4 days in their place of destination. They must also take a polymerase chain reaction test on the 5th day of facility-based quarantine. The 5th day COVID testing requirement shall be subject to review after 30 days of implementation. The passenger must still complete the 7-day quarantine at the facility even if the person tests positive, maybe negative. If found positive, the passenger must follow the prescribed isolation protocols. The government task force likewise required incoming vaccinated passengers to present documents such as vaccine certificates to prove vaccination status. Now there is another protocol for OFWs, overseas Filipino workers or returning overseas Filipinos. And you can go to the BI, Bureau of Immigration site to find out more information there. Here is a little bit of information on the green lanes for vaccinated OFWs, overseas Filipino workers. And if you want to stop the video and read over that, you can do that as well. I pulled this off of a news site, and you can go to the BI website to check out the information. So here is the list of nations, green nations considered. This can change from day to day, week to week, of course. Australia is listed here, Belize. If you've been spending time in Belize in Central America, that may qualify you to make a trip over here if you have the proper documents, visa. China, French Polynesia, Greenland, Hong Kong. That would include some of you, I suspect. And over here, Laos, Israel, going down here, Morocco, Mozambique, might include some of you. And like I said, this can change, and we'll go and look at the next list here. New Zealand is listed, Palau, Senegal, Sierra Leone, that includes a few of you, as well as Sabah, of course. Don't leave that out. Singapore, South Korea, Taiwan, Togo, Turks and Caicos Island, Vietnam. So that is the list, and that's subject to change. These 7 nations are still banned because of high case counts until July 15th, I believe. And they are India, Pakistan, Nepal, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Oman, and the United Arab Emirates. Although if you're an overseas Filipino worker returning, you are exempted from that, I believe. What about travel within the Philippines? That is a good question, and it really varies by region. With so many islands, each island can be, in fact, a friend, John, down on Camigan Island, just north of Mindanao, told me that a few days ago that they are locked down for 1 week. So everybody's just supposed to stay put. Apparently they had a case or two or three. Here's a list of for the entire month of July, the areas under GCQ, General Community Quarantine, and you really even barangays within these areas you can have a local area lockdown. Travel can change almost daily or weekly with restrictions and requirements, so I'm not going to try to get into any of those details. They're just way too confusing. So it makes it risky to travel, definitely within this area, unless you know and you really have to go someplace. Here in Cebu Province, the island of Cebu Island, we're able to travel somewhat. You need to get make hotel reservations. So, for instance, going to Bantayan Island, you make your hotel reservations. They send you a QR code, and you use that to get onto the ferry and get into your hotel, and you do your tracking that way, I guess. Very bottom sentence there. Meanwhile, the rest of the Philippines will be under the least strict modified GCQ, general quarantine, until July 31st. So that means there are still restrictions. My experience here in Cebu City for several months is that the checkpoints pretty much have shut down, although you have a lot more what do you call traffic enforcers. You do have later at night. You have places where they're checking motorbikes, but also for four-wheel vehicles and trucks for the proper documents. So you just don't know. That can become more strict or more lenient in the different areas. There's just no way to keep track of all that. Here's some additional information on the Bureau of Immigration Guide on Travel Restrictions. Filipinos up the top. You need a valid Philippine passport, identification certificate, citizenship retention, and reacquisition act. Balikbayan is technically, I believe it's a Filipino who's been out of the country for over a year. Balikbayan and their family members are allowed to travel in. There again, the requirements. Filipinos or former Filipinos and their spouse and children who are traveling with them with proof of filiation, and foreign nationals with valid and existing visas. Very, very key. With valid and existing visas. You need a valid visa and ACR I-card. Those holding a 9A visa, a work visa, need to present an entry exemption document from the country's foreign posts abroad. So you can't just fly in here, and hopefully the airlines will stop you if you try to board a plane so that you aren't stopped and turned around here. For those countries that rely heavily on tourism and with millions of people involved in the tourism, the hospitality industry, the airline industries, those countries that really rely on that, and as well as all the resorts and airlines, hospitality industry, the more restrictions, requirements, and costs that they load these things up with, the longer it will take for travel to start recovering, for the economy to start recovering. Thailand is finding that out. They've actually been somewhat proactive, but they haven't been very successful. They have come out with a number of special visas, one special visa, and they were looking primarily for tourists with lots of money to spend. And I remember many months ago that they were expecting thousands of tourists, and I think they had a few hundred, in fact. So, and they continue to do that. I would hope that other countries would do the same. The Philippines would become more proactive in reaching out to the tourists, reaching out to the expats who have family members and fiancés in the country, and bring them in, because it's the numbers. You bring in 1 million people, not the rich, a million middle class individuals that are spending, uh, 1,000, 2,000 U.S. dollars or whatever your currency is, 50, 60, 70, 80, 100,000 pesos that they're spending a month here in the Philippines, supporting family and friends, helping to support the hospitality industry, and all those industries pay taxes. These governments are hurting big time for income because of the complete economic shutdown. Anyway, interested in your thoughts and what's going on. All this stuff could come crashing down just as fast as it has previously. They could lock down things again, but hopefully we're starting to go in the right direction, and hopefully in the coming months we can see some travel open up here in the Philippines. Stay safe, stay healthy, and I'll see you next time.